I'm just going to preface this by saying this is not really your typical PowerPoint progressing seminar. We're going to have a conversation. And I'm really excited to have this conversation with Nadia Bremer and Shirley Wu. They are both data visualization artists and authors of the beautiful book, Data Sketches. And if you haven't picked up a copy of this book, I highly encourage you to do so. It's absolutely stunning and something that is accessible. There you go, Nadia. Something that is accessible to anyone. You have to be a little bit strong to pick it up. It's pretty big, but I think the scale really justifies the wonderful work that's inside. So we're here today and we're going to learn a little bit about their journey of imagination, exploration, and beautiful data visualizations, and the project that they embarked on last year as a whole. Let me give a little bit about your biography, and then I want to kind of hear your real story, right? We're going to have your official bio, and then I want the real story. So Nadia Bremer is a data visualization artist who graduated as an astronomer, which that alone I think could keep us going for a whole hour. She started working as a data scientist before finding her true passion in visualization of data. As 2017's Best Individual in the Information is Beautiful Awards, Nadia focuses on visuals that are uniquely crafted for each specific data set, often using large and complex data sets while employing vibrant color palettes. Nadia has created visualizations and art for companies such as Google News Lab, Sony Music, the New York Times, the UNESCO, and one of my favorites, The Guardian. Shirley Wu is an award-winning creative focused on data-driven art and visualizations. Now, Shirley has worked with clients such as Google, The Guardian, Scientific American, the MoMA, San Francisco MoMA, International Rescue Committee, NBC Universal, and she develops custom, highly interactive data visualizations. Shirley combines her love of art, math, and code into colorful, compelling narratives that push the boundaries of the web. And so that's your official bios.
It's kind of weird to hear it.
Yeah, I've never had it read out loud to me.
I wonder if we could, it sounds fantastic. They both sound fantastic. But I wonder if we can begin with a little bit about each of you so our audience can get to know you kind of personally and how this amazing collaboration came to fruition.
Yeah, well, thank you. Well, I was going to say, first of all, thank you so much for inviting us and having us here. I think it's actually been like a year-long effort to make this work. So thank you so much for being patient. And yeah, I'm so happy that we get to have this conversation. Having said that, that was a really large question. So how did we get here, both individually and together? I guess I'll start a little bit about my individual story. And I feel like Nadi, you're always so good at telling our combined story. So I'll suggest it that way. I know. Just like dump the responsibility on you. Okay. So I think that was my official bio. And I guess the longer story is that I actually studied business in university. I thought I was going to be an investment banker. Then I did some internships, realized that was very much not for me, started taking computer science classes, loved that. And then when I graduated, I got a software engineering position, a front-end developer position at a big data company. And that's kind of how I fell into the world of data visualization from the software side. So my first exposure was D3, the JavaScript library. I didn't even know that data visualization was a whole realm back then until like a few years in. And once I discovered it, I just loved it so much that I think 4 years into working full-time, I decided to just quit my full-time job and try my hand at freelancing. And thankfully that has gone quite decently. And that was at the same time at the beginning of my freelancing that I got to meet Nadi at a conference, a lovely conference I wish was still happen, but has not happened for like 3 years, called Open VizConf. And Yeah, and then I started freelancing. You read some of my client list, and that's when I kind of started rounding out my skill set from beyond software engineering to kind of like information design, a little bit of data analysis. And now I've decided to go back to school. So I'm a full-time grad student at NYU in a master's program called ITP, where we combine kind of art and technology. So we make art with kind of emerging tech, software, hardware. And I'm here because I'm very, very interested in what does it mean to bring these data stories out into the physical world and make them into kind of like these immersive, interactive experiences. I know that COVID is still going on and this dream might not come true for like a number of years still, but it's a dream I've had for like quite a while now. So I'm just really excited to be a student again, learning. Yeah. So that was my, I guess, story.
Awesome. That's great. That's great. I want to hear about how you kind of came together and dreamed up this 12-month collaboration.
Yeah. Yeah, let me do that then. As a little bit of background, as the bio said, I studied astronomy. I still love the topic. Don't get me started on it. I can go for hours. But I didn't really like writing the papers. I didn't go on to in academia. Instead, I found myself in consulting, becoming a data scientist. Making predictive models, doing customer segmentations. It was kind of in line with what I was doing with astronomy in terms of investigating data, but instead of about simulations and stars, it was now about mortgages or what people were buying at the McDonald's or you name it. But it was fun. It was fun. But after about 4 years, I realized that I felt like, oh my God, another predictive model. I wasn't quite finding the same passion as I had when I was first learning about it. And then in that period where I felt like, what do I want to do with next? I went to a conference and there was Mike Freeman, also a data visualization expert, now working at Observable. And he had a first slide and that said data visualization specialist. And it literally hit me like lightning in the same way that Shirley had, was like, wait, data viz can be like its own thing. I didn't know that. I always saw it as something that fitted, it was something that fitted onto something else. But once I read that, it was totally clear to me, data viz, that's where my passion was. That's where I would spend hours of my free time tinkering with the visualizations we were putting in our slide decks for clients to see, and I knew that I wanted to do that. So from that, I've been tinkering with data viz before that and been learning some D3 along the way, but I'd never sort of had it as my goal. So after those 4 years, it became my goal to also become a data visualization specialist. Switched jobs for a bit to do dashboards, but realized early on that I couldn't quite find the creative need that I've wanted from dashboards. They can be very, very useful, but they weren't quite right for me. And then data sketches came along. I'll park that for a minute. And then I knew I wanted to do creative data visualization. So 6 months after Shirley, I also started freelancing. And I'm more focused on, throughout the 5 years that I've been freelancing now, I'm starting to focus more and more on data art and more static pieces where I am in full control of how the final visual will look. I find that the technology side is less of my interest in terms of programming, and it's more about how it will visually, the end result will look. But how we found each other, that was actually finally getting to that. So we met in a Slack channel that was data centric, as is now, for example, the Data Viz Society Slack channel in a way. We met then at OpenVisConf, which was that conference, and where we got to know each other, in real life, and we kept on chatting in the Slack channel, and then somewhere, the Information is Beautiful Awards, which sadly also is no longer running. Yes, sadly, came about, and we started chatting. Like, are you going to send something in? And it's like, oh, I don't actually have anything worth. Nothing. I haven't created anything big in the last year. That was our conclusion from that. And then through that, in Shirley's mind, that suddenly became like, wait, but why don't we collaborate and sort of force ourselves to make database once every so often? And then I was like, yes. A great idea.
This was 2016. I think we both laughed a little bit when you said 12 months, and because it initially started out as a 12-month project. It was supposed to run from summer 2016 to summer 2017. It took much longer than that. So it literally became like a 5-year long like collaboration, where I think maybe a year or two into the project, we were fortunate enough to sign the contract for writing a book, and then that kind of like, you know, took over our lives, and then the book took a good 2 or 3 years, and we went into it being like, we have the write-ups, because for data sketches the concept was 12 topics. We each do a data visualization from scratch around that topic. And, you know, we go out and find the data set, we do our own designs, and we do the code. And the collaboration part is kind of like the feedback and bouncing the ideas off of each other. And then at the end, we would do a whole write-up about the project. And our write-ups are still online at datasketch.es. We took half of it down for the book, but we were like, we have the write-ups. Like, we know that writing a book is hard, but also we have the write-ups. It was so hard. It was still so hard.
Yeah, it's different just, you know, writing whatever comes to mind on a website where you don't feel obligation to anyone, versus having to write a good story that will go into a book that people have to pay money for.
Yeah.
No, I think that's great. You're actually answering some of my questions as we're just kind of talking, and which is great, because I'd much rather hear from you than hear from me. And I just want to let the audience know you're more than welcome to chime in and ask questions as well. If you have any questions, you can put them in the chat, or you can, if you're brave, you can unmute yourself and ask the question as well. So let's see, what should I ask you guys next? Do you have a favorite project from the book?
Ooh.
Yeah.
You know what's funny? The first ones that come to mind are actually Naughty's. I have like favorites from Naughty. Like, wait, okay, no, but you should go first, Naughty.
Yeah, my favorite is actually the last one that I did, which was Figures in the Sky, where I gathered data about constellations, so the stick figures in the sky connecting between the stars, but then for 28 different cultures. Thankfully, that data was all with Stellarium. Yeah, that one. It's all with Stellarium, which is sort of an open source planetarium. But then I wanted to overplot all of them on the same sky, so you can get a sense of how different cultures have seen either different or very similar results in the same stars in that sense. And some patterns, such as the Big Dipper and Orion, almost any culture has made that into some sort of constellation, which I thought was fascinating to see. But I think this is also a favorite of mine because it is about astronomy, and so I have a bias for space. But it's also one of my biggest projects for data sketches, which kind of brought together everything that I've been learning over the past year. It was a big project, so all of these things combined basically makes it my personal project, favorite project.
Perfect. So beautiful, so beautiful. Shirley, which one should we look at with you?
Oh gosh, I have quite a few that I really like and enjoy. I think the one that I have the most history, I guess, with is probably the Hamilton one. But I also actually like some of the kind of smaller projects, like to Nadi's point, like Hamilton is one of those where I spent so much time on it, and it really is kind of a reflection of my skill set back when I made the project. And also I think it resonated. Oh wait, that's the write-up. So I think you might have to click on the image itself, I think is what's gonna, yeah, perfect.
There we go.
Yeah, and I was absolutely obsessed with Hamilton the musical. And I think this was a really fun moment in that I spent like 3 months slaving on this over this project. It went out into the world. And then there was a lot of other Hamilton fans that was just as obsessed as me, that I got to know. So I think this was the first moment where I was like, oh, this kind of data visualizations that I'm making that I thought was just like kind of like a little hobby of mine, like it can actually really reach people and like really bring about great conversations. One of my favorite reactions was like when a mother tweeted at me that like this is something that she and her son can bond over because they were just starting to like study computer science together. And and then they're also big Hamilton fans. So hearing things like that when people are like, oh, I didn't know coding could be so fun and visual and colorful. This was, I think, the first project where I realized how much impact a data visualization can have. And then I think the other one that is probably my favorite is also my last one, the one that's called One Amongst Many. Yeah, I think you can just type in, oh yeah. If you go scroll all the way to the top, it's called One Amongst, yeah. And that one is my first physical installation that I got to work with two others at ITP. I was like a artist in residence back then. And so this is a installation. The data set is 16 women computer scientists. Each of them are represented as orbs, and they all start kind of dimly lit. And as people go and read more and more about them, they become brighter and brighter lit. And kind of the concept behind it is that these are women computer scientists that have like done amazing things that like most of us have not heard anything about. This is the online version for like, because people obviously can't, like not everybody can attend the in-person version, but if you keep scrolling, then it just goes through all of the women computer science and scientists, and you can kind of just learn about them. But this one is special to me because it's my very first venture into physical, and this is where I got to learn Arduinos, sensors, lights, wiring, power sources, and it's exactly what I'm doing right now. Yeah, and this felt like kind of like a tying between what I used to do to what I want to do now.
Yeah, like I said, you guys are answering my questions. One of the things I'm really excited to talk to you both about is data physicalization. And so I didn't kind of preface this with introducing myself. I introduced the both of you, but I didn't introduce myself. And what's really exciting for me listening to you speaking is that we recently established a new lab under the Texas A&M Institute for Data Science. And the lab is called VIVID, which is an abbreviation for visceral intrasensory visualization and information design. And one of the things that we're particularly interested in is data physicalization and materialization. And Nadi, I know that you recently took a workshop on physicalization, and surely I've been following your projects on Twitter with the Arduinos and turning pages and all those things. Do you see this as something that is going to be the future of data visualization, where people want more than just a visual, or where anything can necessarily be a display, not just a visual display? And can you talk a little bit about what you see happening in that space?
I think there will always be data visualizations on the screen, and I think it'll always be the main way people see data. But I think with data becoming more ubiquitous and more something that people have in their lives and not fear in a way that they used to, that having a data physicalization and data installations, data art installations will become more mainstream in a way that they will take their place amongst other kinds of exhibitions. And for the right cases where, well, that really depends on the data and your goals. It's it's the best way to make people really interact with that particular data set and teach them about that data set and have that goal, just taking them away from the screen and really putting them inside the data. So I definitely see it becoming much bigger in the future, in a sense, than what it is right now. It still feels very new, and then there are only a few places and people and small agencies that are really doing this. And so there's so much still to explore on ways to do data physicalization, which is really interesting and fun to think about, that you could be, finding your own way in that. And yeah, I have no idea where it's going to go, but I definitely see a bright future for having it here, in a sense.
Yeah, I agree very much with what Nadia is saying, in that I think as we get more and more people comfortable with data visualizations and data literacy, especially in the last 2 years with what's been happening, I think people are going to be more and more accepting of kind of non-traditional forms of data visualization and just telling stories with data beyond the like line charts and bar charts and stuff. We're already seeing that with data visualization. I do think that my expectation of data physicalization is a little bit more tempered, but then my expectation for data visualization. And the number one reason for that is access. I think data visualization as something that's designed for the screen is something that like people around the world, if they have an internet connection, can see. So in that sense, the information dissemination, right? Like the distribution, the information distribution is like the potential is so much wider. Whereas I think data physicalization will always have an element of exclusivity to them, in that they'll always have to be in one physical space for you to take advantage of them. You can make many iterations of it and send it out to many different parts of the world, but people will still have to travel to that place to experience it, right? And then there's also kind of the exclusivity to it, that like if it's an exhibit in a museum, museums often cost a lot. Like I think like a typical art museum is like $20 to $30. And that's something that might be prohibitive for a lot of people. It might be prohibitive for a lot of people that are kind of the people that should see the visualization or physicalization. And so I think those are the kind of things that I think about a lot about data physicalization, which is like, is it even possible to create the same kind of access to it that we can with visualization? And I don't have a good answer. I think it has many advantages of being able to like experience a data story beyond just our eyes and use more of our senses. But how do we overcome the barrier of access?
Yeah, I think that's really a good point. We have a question from Rachel in the chat. So it says, I work in an organization where they are jumping all in with dashboards, even for simple data stories. Being that both of you freelance, what type of career fields or level of data literacy have you found is the most receptive to static and artful visualizations?
Ooh, that's a very good question.
Yeah. Do you want to start with this one?
So the first thing that comes to mind is, I don't want to make like broad stroke statements, but I do feel like data journalism tends to be more open to the more kind of like non-traditional forms. I think they tend to be a little bit more experimental. I think because some of the stories they're trying to tell, it might be like more multifaceted or complex. Having said that, I'm not trying to say that like, business analytics and dashboards aren't multifaceted and complex, but I think there's a very different purpose or goal for those kind of two types of visualizations. The data journalism is very much like kind of about grabbing an audience's attention, like a general mass audience's attention, and getting them to read through the visualization. So I think that's where some of the more like, I don't want to say flashy, but like more intriguing, esoteric looking visualizations work out a lot in their favor. Whereas my experience with like more internal business tools, which I don't have that much experience with dashboards, but just working with the clients I have had with business analytics, they're, I think, much more keen towards the traditional forms that are much easier to communicate their point across, because oftentimes they're trying to build it for their execs that might not have that much time. And so whatever is the easiest to grasp quickly is what they're aiming for. But I think the appetite really depends on the organizations and people. Some organizations I've worked with are like much more open to experimentation, whereas and like more artistic forms, and others aren't. So it really depends on people.
Yeah, this leads into another question I have. Nadia, did you have anything to add on that one, or did you? Okay, yeah.
I basically wanted to say that was my answer.
So I'm in a department called visualization, which basically is the marriage of art and science. And I know that art and science is at the heart of everything you do. Can you tell us a little bit about that and why you feel it's important, and why that collaboration makes your work so successful?
Cool. The combination of art and science. Well, trying to gather my thoughts here. On the one hand, I find that humans are such visual creatures, so it's a very being able to explain concepts and trends and patterns through a visual means. It makes so much more sense than seeing tables of numbers. So in that sense, I think that's where, if you want to, I find. If you want to properly explain science, you either need to be some sort of math genius and can stuff can start to make sense through beautiful formulas. But most people in the world just do this through visual means, I find, and drawing things and plotting the data. So that's why you really need that visual side, I think. But for me, I just love the creative side, and I love the science side. I love being able to dive into a new project, whether that be astronomy or a different topic, or about airplanes and finding the patterns and when they fly and where they fly to, and being able to see that, oh, that must be a holiday week because all the planes are going to Turkey. That kind of thing can excite me just as much. And then I want to also be able to tell that story to other people and show that in a visually interesting way to grab their attention, but also just for myself, that I like working on things that that hopefully look beautiful. And that's so that's a very non-elegant way of saying that it's just something I enjoy doing.
Excellent. Excellent. So when I look at those projects from data science, especially the two that are data sketches, especially the two that we just pulled up, I mean, they're huge projects. And so kind of, I mean, I'm wondering, first of all, what tools are in your tool set? What, how did you gravitate towards those tools? Did you have to learn those tools? Is there parts of the project that kind of fail? What do you do when you get stuck? Maybe you could walk us through kind of the bird's eye view of the creative process. And I'd like both of you maybe to do that, to see if you have commonalities or differences.
Definitely both.
Do you want to start, or?
Okay. Sure. So my tool set generally is R, the statistical language.
I'm teaching a class on data analytics and visualization at the moment, and we're using R. So it's great to hear that.
Yes, it's good. Yeah, so many people are talking about Python, and nothing against Python, but I also, when I started out, I tried both. And I could get started with R in no time, and with Python, after 2 hours, I still didn't have a library installed. So it's like, oh, R. Although these days I sometimes use Python, but mostly R.
Yes.
And then R, and that's what I do to do my data preparation and initial data analysis, and making lots of bar charts and scatter plots to kind of build the story up for myself. And once I know what I want to tell the story, I will sort of change the data set, put things together in the way that I need it for the visual. Then I will always go towards the web. So I make my visualizations with JavaScript. mostly very vanilla, but often using D3.js, the library, because it is such a handy tool set. Even there are so many sort of Lego blocks that can help you in the different phases of visualizing, from setting up your data in the right way to scales and colors and actually plotting it on the screen. I use Visual Studio Code as my code editor, and either Chrome or Firefox with the dev tools to investigate, sort of to build my visual and look through the bugs and things. So that is kind of my process. I mean, every project you get stuck in some way. It's so frustrating that I might start out with a project and I have a design, like rough designs, like, oh, I'm gonna do this with, try and do this with circles connected by lines somehow, something. But I have no idea how it's going to look, and I also never know if it's going to work well, or how, like, what is the design going to be? And that's sort of a never-ending iterative process that I go through, and just kind of go with the flow, or have a rough idea of a design that I think might fit the topic. You could be inspired by the fact that you're doing something about music or something about your favorite book, and that helps to inspire that. But if I get stuck, I try and do two things. A few things. So I take a lot of screenshots throughout the process, through different phases that I have my visual. And if I'm stuck, I might actually go back a lot of screenshots just to see, because sometimes I find that I've gone into a tangent, and that felt very natural. It's like I'm improving on myself. But if I'm looking back, I feel like, no, wait a minute. I'm actually happier with what was happening here, even though we're right now over here. So I might actually go back to that and then see if I can go into a different tangent, or see where that leads me. But that really depends on sometimes I just feel like a previous version was better. Sometimes I will just leave the thing that I'm stuck on, and will try and develop a different part of the visual. I did that actually for the Cardcaptor Sakura piece, where I was quite stuck on one part of the visual, but I had an idea of how I wanted other parts of the visual to look. So I went on with that. And once I saw the rest getting a better shape on the screen, I suddenly realized, like, oh, that one part that I was stuck on, I should actually, now that I have a better image, I should do it like that, and that fixed it. I also look at what other people have done. So I have Pinterest boards with visuals that I look through then to see if maybe some of their ways of doing it inspired me. Or if you're really stuck, don't try and force it, but take a break and maybe see if you can go at it again another day and have a different idea. And sometimes I also have to realize that it doesn't feel quite right, but this is as good as I'm gonna make it, and I just need to move on. It's like, I tried, I gave it my all, and this is what I can do.
Excellent.
And the great thing about that is nobody else knows, like, what people will just see, like, what you put out and be like, whoa, that's amazing. And then they won't ever know what else was in your head that you were trying to get at. I think Nadi pretty much covered the what to do when stuck. For me, the tools are a little bit different. We actually outline the tools we use in great detail in our book. It's like one of the first intro sections. But for me, one of the parts I always really struggled with was the data part, like exploring the data sets. Because I come from like like a web dev background. I'm mainly a JavaScript developer, and especially 6 or 7 years ago, JavaScript wasn't the best for data analysis, nor is it really now. So I've always struggled with that. There was a little bit of time, like Nadi, where I tried to pick up Python for the data analysis, and I was just so slow at the context switching between Python and JavaScript that was like, I'm just going to keep with JavaScript. So it's taken me quite a few years to really figure out the tool sets that work for me, working in one language without having to context switch to another. And so my tool set now is that for data exploration, I'll actually use actually for data collection, I think maybe that part is actually to step a little bit back. For data collection, I think we either manual entry with Excel spreadsheets, which is something I learned for Nadi, because before Excel spreadsheets, I was like, literally, entering them into a code editor, like as CSV. So I'll be like number, comma. And then I read Nadi's like write up and I was like, oh, that's right. Excel exists. So there's either manual entry or like scraping the web or hitting APIs, which I'll use like Node.js for. Just some simple server-side code. Then when I do data exploration, I'll actually pull the data into observable and I'll start kind of really quickly playing around with it. Mostly I'll use observable plot. I used to use Vega Lite and I think observable plot has kind of replaced that for me, because I think at the end of the day, the way that I explore and analyze data is still very visually. So I'll use observable plot to like put the data sets into very simple charts. I'll start with some questions or curiosities I have about the data set. And then I'll try to put them into the simple charts to see if I can answer those curiosities. And if I can't, then I might go back to any like interesting tangents I might have found while trying to explore the data set and like kind of try and explore down that line, down that path. And then the exploration and design kind of blur for me, because while I'm exploring, I'm starting to like think of the fact that I'm exploring with charts start to kind of influence how I think about the final design. And so once I have a good idea of kind of the main points I want to tell, I'll start drawing out some of my ideas on my iPad. And then once I have like a good idea of that, I'll start going into the rest of this I think is very similar to Nadi's process, in that I'll go into my text editor, which these days is Visual Studio Code. And I'll start coding in JavaScript. If it's a pretty small piece, it's usually I'll just do D3, probably Lodash.js, which is a JavaScript library with some utility functions. If it's more involved and like very interactive, then I'll start pulling in Vue.js, which is I usually use for state management. There are a few times when I did like 3D projects, and those times I used Three.js and WebGL. Yeah, so very much kind of like JavaScript, all JavaScript stack. And that's kind of what I found helps and works for me. The part, something Nadi said reminded me that the part that I have the biggest struggle with is kind of the design part, where I'm never really, it's really hard to, I think data visualization design is like a very interesting combination of like, there is a sort of right answer in that like you don't want to mislead with your visualization, but also it's highly subjective because it's design. So there's like not a fully right answer. It's like never 100% right. So then I like sometimes get into this, like get stuck into this loop of like, is this design actually good? Or like, is it gonna confuse people? And I found over the years, I really enjoy working with like a domain expert on especially this design part, because then I can like bounce the designs off of them and be like, is this working for you? Like what would make this clearer for you? If it's like a personal project that like doesn't really have a domain expert I can go to, I'll ask like Nadi, or I'll ask other people for feedback, being like, what do you think about this? Like, what can I, like, is this clear? What can I do to change this? And once I get the designs going, I think code has a right answer, right? Like code is like, it either works or it doesn't work. It either has a lot of bugs or doesn't have the bugs. And so that part I think is like pretty smooth going. But yeah, I agree that when I get stuck, usually I'll just step away, work on like some other project, or like for me, it's much more, I just need to like put it aside and go do something else and come back, and then I'll have fresh perspective on it. And also looking at inspiration, I tried to look at inspiration outside of the data visualization field, like much more kind of tangential fields, other kind of art fields, or so yeah, I think that's my process.
Yeah, you kind of answered one of the questions that was in the chat. Do you have any sort of validation for your visuals before you release them to the public in terms of, will the public understand what I've created in the way I've intended? That was a question from Astrid, and David has a kind of follow-up question. Could you give a very specific example of how working with a domain expert changed your approach to data visualization?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting one. I think there's some, I don't know if this is an exact answer to the question, but I think there are some topics where you have to work with a domain expert, right? When Nadi and I were working on the Guardian piece about homelessness, that's not something that the two of us would have tackled by ourselves, right?
No,
Nope. That's not, that's a very sensitive topic that like we definitely needed domain experts for. I don't think that, I'm not sure if the visuals, it's not as much that we had visuals that changed dramatically after we pitched it to the client. It's that we went into the room with the client, like Nadi had done a bunch of like analysis on the data sets, and we like, and the Guardian, the editors had like a general idea of the kind of story they wanted to tell. And once we got into the room together, we started brainstorming, bouncing ideas of like what kind of visuals would help really support that story. And so it's less about how we have an idea already and the domain expert's feedback changes it. It's much more like it's earlier in that, like we wouldn't even start pitching design ideas until we've like had a good chance to talk about what it is that they want to show. And then after that, I think it's like much smaller tweaks of like Nadi, do you remember like all of these visuals are almost the same as when we initially talked through them, right?
Yes. Yeah. I think they are really similar to the initial sketches. And that's the thing. The domain experts help us understand the data better and understand what the aspects of the data are that we want to focus on, because there are so many, some data sets you can just look at it from different angles and find multiple stories. So there, the domain expert helps us to fine tune, this is the story that you need to tell. And then from our expertise, it's more that we can then figure out how to best visualize that particular conclusion from the data in a way.
Great. It's just so interesting. I have so many questions, and I'm realizing we only have 15 minutes left. I think we'll take one question from the chat. It's from Yefi. I hope I'm saying that right. It says, "Hi Shirley and Nadi, how do you feel about being a freelancing artist / data scientist compared to having a stable full-time job, career development, financially, freedom, etc.? Thank you."
I still feel that going into freelancing was the best business decision I've ever made, but it really also depends. Shirley and I had this fortune that we started out in database and had our own sort of blogs and post, putting our stuff on social media when it was really just up and coming. So it was easy to sort of bubble up on top if you were doing enough projects. And so in that sense, both of us have the luck that that we have a sort of a presence on the internet, so possible clients are able to find us. And I think because of that, because we have enough clients that find us for things that we can do, we are outside of the I need to worry about money zone. And then it becomes, once you're outside of that zone, at least I feel it becomes so nice to be able to have the freedom of deciding when you're going to work, whether that be on a weekend or that you take some breaks during the week, that you are your own boss and nobody tells you necessarily what to do. Like there are cases when you and a client just sort of need to separate because some things aren't working, and now that is in your hands to do instead of a boss that tells you need to keep working on this. There are the downsides. You are the full responsibility is on you. You don't have a manager above you that you can sort of hide behind. You have to read through the contracts and hope that they're not trying to screw you over, that they will never, like, it will never come to pass that whatever is in that contract is going to screw you over. The overhead of emailing with all of the clients and seeing what projects you want to do. But in the end, I think the positives of just the flexibility, being able to find your own path and designing kind of your own course far outweigh the downsides of also being your own boss.
Yeah, I very much agree with that, especially the part about the freedom is really, really nice of taking the clients that we want to take, as well as being able to, because I think that's one of the biggest freedoms I enjoy is getting to work with people that I want to work with and not have to work with people that I don't want to work with. And that's not necessarily a freedom that we have in the workplace. I will say that financially, it was much more stressful for me. Like, I think Nadia and I have talked about this, but with each other, not publicly, but for me, because I was in San Francisco Bay Area, first of all, it's like ridiculous cost of living, so I definitely felt that pressure to, like, I think especially for the first few years financially, it was really hard to try and make the same amount that I was making as a software engineer with, like, a livable wage in the Bay Area freelancing. That was really hard. That has come with a lot of learnings of, like, I just need to be much more confident about, like, my skill sets and charging for what I'm worth. That's a whole, lesson I learned over the 5 years I was freelancing of not underselling myself. But the other part of it is, like, I think this might just be me, but Silicon Valley has this, like, feeling of a rat race and of, like, how much you should be making at each point of your career. And so that I think was also really stressful for me of, like, oh, if I hadn't been, so this kind of has to do with the career development of the question of, like, oh, if I wasn't freelancing, I could be making X amount right now with this sort of position title. And that's not, at the end of the day, I think the freedom and how much I love what I'm doing and the projects I get to work on are worth much more than the financial and title gains that I would have gotten. But it's still something that I think I felt a lot of the pressure just being around everybody else in Silicon Valley with the full-time positions. I'm not in Silicon Valley anymore, and I'm really happy. Because I don't have to worry about this. But I think certainly one of the hard parts about freelancing is that clients are usually paying us for our expertise. So unlike, I think I think there are some job opportunities where you get to learn a lot on the job, like you're being paid to acquire new skills. Whereas I think when clients pay us, it's not so that we can go and, like, learn a new, library or learn a new technology. It's because we've already done the learning and they're paying us extra to do the thing quickly and well. And so that means that it gets harder and harder, at least for me personally, to find the time in between client projects to gain big new skills. I think it's like, if we're just trying to learn a library, I think, a month off, a few weeks off here and there, and we'll get it. But for something like what I was trying to do now with, like, learning a whole new, like, essentially hardware and electrical engineering, I just couldn't fit that in between client projects. And so I do find that there is an ebb and flow of, like, I need a few years, like, working at a company to, like, really solidify skills. Then I can market those skills to clients. And now what I'm doing is, like, I need a few years at school to learn new skills, and then, like, hopefully then work a few years and then have the skills again to, like, market myself to clients as freelancers. So I think there is,
perfect.
Part
That's
of it too.
the great answer and great advice, Shirley. Great answer. Can we
Thank
talk
you.
Can we talk a little bit about how you select color palettes for your design? I know we could talk about that maybe for an hour. And specifically, do you have any practical tips or pointers for people who are trying to maybe they're not as on the artistic side, and how would they select palettes, or how would they, you know, maybe use something that's pretty compelling visually?
I feel like my answer should be very short because Shirley has the more interesting answer here. I'd say if you don't feel like you have that yourself, I try and see, like, if I see an image from somebody else that I think looks great, color pick that palette. It's a great way to start. Maybe you'd have to tweak it a little bit, because I have to admit a lot of palettes don't necessarily work for data visualization. So that kind of sucks. Yeah, I think in general, that could be a great place. Look at other data visualizations and then see if you like their palette. Could it be applied to yours? That would be my short answer. And the other one is, it just takes a really, really long time to find a good color palette. Don't see it as something you do at the final point, but that you give it proper time. For my last sort of collection that I made, I spent 5 days on it, but that I had to create almost 40 color palettes for that one. So that was a lot of work. But Shirley has a better answer. She's thought more about it.
No, you should shout out that project, because it was a beautiful project. You should highlight it.
It's called Anhedra, but it's more of a generative art project. So that means that instead of data, I'm using pure randomness, but being inspired by the way crystals form, minerals form in rocks, but then using colors to grow out instead of, the copper and other atomic elements.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were talking about UNICEF, but that is also a beautiful one.
Yeah, that was also about 3 or 4 days of work to create 26 palettes. Yeah, that one.
Yes, it's gorgeous. Wait, this is Nadi said that about me because on another podcast I went on a whole like rant about color palettes. I'll try and shorten it this time around. I feel like I think as someone that's really struggled with a color palette, where I first started was I basically took the rainbow and then I like applied some saturation on it and then came up with a color palette that was like, this is nice. Because I think, to Nadi's point, we can't use a lot of the color palettes that are already out there, especially for web development, because web development is very much for like one primary color, one background color, one call to action color. And oftentimes, like, I think a good color palette has 6 or 7, maybe 7 or 8 colors. If what we're trying to show is something discrete, usually it's like 6 or 7 distinct colors that we might want. And so for that, I think Nadia and I have both said that we started with the rainbow. And then you just pick and choose what colors. We just pick and choose which colors appeal to us. And then what I do is every time I come up with a new color palette, I kind of just pick and choose between those to fit like the mood and aesthetic of the project. And then I make sure to pass it through something like Susie's Viz palette. I think it's like viz-palette.suzielu. I don't know. And then what that does is tries to make sure that the colors are friendly for color blindness and other accessibility reasons. And then I'm trying to like speed this up. And then the biggest thing that helped me was so that's really helpful. And then just read everything that Lisa Charlotte Muth ever puts out. I think she's coming out with a book, but she has so many great blog posts about all of the things that go into picking out a color palette for, a sequential data, for discrete data, for colorplex on maps. Just read anything that Lisa ever puts out about color. And actually just everything.
Great. Well, we're actually kind of running out of time here. Really quick, as a final question and to wrap up, what advice would you have for somebody who's maybe starting out in this field? Any tips?
Yes, yes. Create lots of projects, do it around topics that you are personally interested in, not the data sets that are quickly available. And then create a portfolio so you can share your style and your progress. Take things out again of your portfolio that you made long ago, but you've progressed to a different state right now. So really be a curator of your own portfolio, but just create lots of stuff. That's how you learn, that's how you get experience, and that just sort of compounds together.
Perfect. I think that applies across other fields as well as just data. That's great advice. Great advice. Shirley, do you have anything to add?
It's exactly what Nadi said. Portfolio. We have the advantage of a very visual practice, so it's very easy for other people to see what we're working on. Yeah, just keep making.
Great. Okay, well, I think we've covered all the questions in the chat. I still have pages and pages of questions, so maybe we will.
I'm so sorry.
Oh my gosh.
When this pandemic maybe settles down a little bit, maybe we'll get you guys to visit us in College Station. We would love to have you. It's always so wonderful to listen to you. I've attended many of these where I'm in the audience. It was an honor to be the moderator and get to ask my questions. I really appreciate you both. You're super busy. It was a wonderful discussion, and I really just want to say thank you so much, and thank you to you, Ding, for helping us set everything up, and to Nick Duffield and Jennifer South from the Texas A&M Institute for Data Science. Thank you both so much. I want to go back now and reread data sketches and with new eyes, and say just thank you so much for being so wonderful and so inspiring, and agreeing to come visit us in Texas. Thank you.
Thank you as well for having us.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
Good luck with your studies. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.